Okay, everyone, we're on the hour, so I think it's time to start. So, first of all, let me just start by saying hello back to everyone who's been saying hello in the chat. Nice to see you all here, and nice to see some familiar faces back there again, coming back. I'm delighted to be joined today by Alan Seiden from the Seiden Group. And Alan, in turn, is being joined by two of his cohorts, Calvin Buckley and Kath Hewitt, who will be helping Alan out with any questions that you may have during his presentation. So if you haven't been to one of these before, or even if you have, just to remind you how this works, I will be talking for about 15 minutes or so on DDS to DDL conversion. And then Alan is going to tell us all about what's new in open source on IBM I in 2023, which I'm really looking forward to. And then I will, at the end, talk for about another 15 minutes on more DDS to DDL things. If at any stage you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom, not the chat, to post any questions to us. Now, this is also not just for our benefit, but also for the benefit of people who will be looking at the recording. Okay, so it's easier for them to see things in the Q&A as opposed to a question being buried in the middle of the chat amongst all of the hellos from all over the world. Okay, so without further ado, I shall get started here talking about DDS to DDL. So when we look at making this shift in our database, and I'll talk about the why of this in a second, there are sort of two approaches that we can take. What I like to refer to as the minimal approach and the feature-rich approach for doing this. For the first 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about the minimal approach, and then in the second part, I will talk about the feature-rich approach. That's not easy to say at this hour of the night, but here we go. Okay, so what's the big deal about moving to DDL? I mean, why do you want to start using DDL as opposed to sticking with DDS? Well, the first thing is data integrity. So defining things with, defining your database with DDL means you get better data integrity. And the most important of these has to do with validity checking. So if you have a table, as opposed to a physical file, in a table, it is impossible to put data in that table that would cause a decimal data error later in a program. So it's impossible in any way to overwrite a numeric field with, say, blanks, which is the most common one, where you put the hex 40 into a packed numeric field. Also, things like constraints and triggers are more directly integrated into DDL, okay, as opposed to being separate sets of commands or separate things that you have to do. You can do them sort of all in one. You also get more functionality through DDL. So there are more data types available to you. You can even define your own data types. And of course, the big thing that you have in DDL is views. And so with views, you can have views of views. And so think of it this way, you can't have a logical of a logical. And you can have views that provide summary or aggregate information. We can have derived columns and selection criteria that go way beyond anything that you can do with DDS. Okay. The other thing, of course, is DDL is an industry standard. So it isn't something that is unique to IBM I. It is pretty much the same on all databases. Now, by the way, DDL will have different flavors depending on which database you're on, but the core of it is the same. The other thing to be aware of, and this is very important when you look at modernizing a database, is that DDL and DDS coexist together. It is not a case of one or the other. So we're not talking about a thing of, oh, well, if you're going to move to a DDL database, this means you have to throw out everything that you have, and you have to go and do big rewrites in all of your programs to make everything work. One of the major things that we're aiming for when we move from DDS to DDL is I want all of my programs to stay exactly where they are. Actually, I don't want to have to recompile any of my programs. And at the end of it, I want to end up with, well, here I have, DDL. I can start now using all of those benefits that I get from a DDL database. But everything that I have stays exactly as it is and will keep working. I don't break anything. This is really what we're aiming for. Okay. So as part of this coexistence, you need to be aware that you can create an index over a physical file. You can have a view over a physical file, or I could create a logical file over a table, right? So you can intermix as you wish. What you cannot do is you cannot create a logical file over a view, or you cannot have a view over a logical file. So where I can have a view of a view, I cannot have a view of a logical. There are some things, though, that DDL doesn't give us, and these are ones that can cause us a little bit of problems, and we'll talk about these in the second half. So not all DDS keywords are supported by DDL, so you don't have equivalent. So for example, things like edit code and edit word can give you issues if you have those defined in tables or in physical files at the moment. You don't have a way of equating that in a table. And DDL does not support multi-member tables, which is a good thing. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, their multi-member tables are an abomination and always have been, and they don't support DDM either. Now, we also have a thing of this that potentially with tables, there is a slightly slower write to the table, but that's because the data integrity is being checked. In other words, you have validation on a write to a table. So you'll be nitpicky about it. It means the write of the record is slightly slower. But it's one of those things, sort of, I defy you to spot the difference. Okay, so the two approaches we have, I said, is the first one is the minimal approach. And the minimal approach means that you leave all of your physicals and your logicals exactly as they are. So you're actually not going to change anything. But what you're going to do is make your database look as if it's a modern database. So to do this, what you're going to do is create primary views over all of the physicals. And these primary views will make your physical files look as if they are proper tables. Okay, so this is sort of where you create one view per physical file. Okay. Now, there is sort of a restrictive outcome to this, though, because it means nothing has changed. And it means you don't gain any of the maintenance benefits that you can get with DDL. The feature-rich approach is that you redefine all of your physical files as tables, okay? And then your physical files, the current physical file becomes a logical over that new table. All of your logicals now have to point to the new tables, okay? And the big thing with all of this is what you have to make sure, and we'll talk about this in the second half about how you go about this, is to make sure that the record format names, all the record format names remain the exact same, so you don't get level checks, okay? But once you do this, it means you now have the full benefits of DDL, even to the extent of where you can go and add columns to a table, and it doesn't affect anything, okay? You don't have to go recompiling if you add columns to a table. So in this example, I'm going to be using this field reference file, which just has, it's a fairly typical field reference file that it just has a whole bunch of columns defined alphabetically. Be aware, though, that generally in DDL databases, we do not use field reference files or data dictionaries. Okay, the main reason that we had these field reference files and that back in DDS is because we did things like this, which is where we use that column name that's in the field reference file, but we put prefixes or suffixes in front of everything, okay? Now, the only place that this might have been of benefit was if you were looking at, as on display files and print files, something we should never have done on database, okay? But we're going to look here, it'll be primarily that customer table that I'm going to be looking at in terms of things, but yeah, the others are in there as well. Okay, so the minimal approach to this is that you set up a conversion database. Okay, so you set up a database that will work out all of the conversion stuff that you want to do for creating these primary views. So if you think about it, if I'm going to create a primary view, the type of thing I need to know is, well, what's the name of the view going to be, the long name? And what are all the long names for the columns that are in there? Okay, and of course, what I'm looking for is a consistency in those long names. So for example, if it's customer ID, which will be on a few tables because it's a relational column, I got to make sure it's called customer underscore ID on all of the views where it's relevant. Okay. So we do this through this sort of a conversion database, which we'll see in a second. And just so you're aware, by the way, all of this is sort of based on articles I wrote on IT Jungle, these 3 articles here. So all of the code for the stored procedures and everything that I'm going to reference, you will find in those 3 articles. Okay, it's all out there. Okay, so this is just setting up the 2 conversion tables that we use. We use one for the tables themselves, okay, and by the way, this is going to be used to generate the name of the primary view that we have, and one for all the column definitions in all of the physical files that we're going to build the views over. And this is what we're going to be sort of setting up here. And what we're really interested in here is this one of the long column name. Okay. So to get this to work, I have a little stored procedure called extract definitions. And what you pass it is the name of a schema and a table, basically. And which, by the way, defaults to star all. So it will pick up all physical files in a library for you by default. You also then identify what the number of prefix and or suffix characters that are being used on the different files are. So in this example back here, so if I just go back, okay, 2. So you can see here we're using 2 character prefixes everywhere. Okay. Now, what it's going to generate, this stored procedure, is going to populate the tables, and it's going to generate a proper column name, which will be without the prefix, and it'll have a shot at creating the long column name. Now, it takes this from the text description that's on your column, because generally that's what our column name is going to be. So this is what we get when we do it with the test tables that I had. So here's one for the 3 ones here. And as we can see, the long table name is basically taken from the text. Okay, but spaces and that or any special characters are replaced with an underscore. And in here, we're just getting all the columns that are in the 3 physical files. Here it's extracted the proper column name, okay, which is without the CM at the front, and has tried to generate the long column name exactly the same as based on the text description for the column. So this just populates it, it's an attempt. And then we have another stored procedure called analyze names. And this is going to return 4 result sets to me. Okay, so we're sort of doing validation on what's in there. So it's picking out things like, oh, there's a problem with the name, the long name. So for example, this long name here on the tables is because there's 2 underscores beside each other. And it sort of says, that doesn't look right to me. Okay, where you'd have sort of space and sort of thing in a name. Okay. And again, so we get ones like here, the generated long names. So it's going here, this contact underscore S underscore first. Doesn't look right. Or one where there was no name. So we get that missing value in there. Okay, other ones is where the generated long name is different for the proper names. So here on 2 different files, I had amount, but on one file, okay, it got translated to stock amount. On the other, it was amount. So, inconsistency is what it's picking out, okay? Or on this one here, the reverse of that, where there are different proper names, but the long name got to be the same. And again, it's saying, surely these should be different, okay? So, okay, in converting from DDL to DDS, is there any change in backup process? No, I mean, you still have libraries that you're saving. So, sorry, a bit hard for me to answer that without going to, without answering it, without knowing exactly what your backup process is. Okay, so those problems that you identify, you just go and fix in these conversion tables. So you either, use SQL, use a file editor, do whatever you want, okay? And keep rerunning that analyze as often as you like, okay? And then the boring bit, right? Now we have to go and make sure that everything is okay. So you're looking for typos in the descriptions. So somebody had spelled customer CSUSTM, that type of thing. Okay, our abbreviations that were used, our unnecessary text that's in there. Okay, so you can see, for example, here, I'm getting rid of, like in the name, underscore file. Yeah, so having a file called customer underscore master underscore file. No, it should be just called customer master. Okay, so those kind of tidy ups is what we do. Okay, and then we rerun that analyze name as long as we want. And then when we're happy with that, we generate a script. So we have a command, and what that will do is generate a script, and that script will look something like this. One for each physical file would be, here's the primary view with all sort of proper column names, with all our consistency and everything like that. Now, all this has given us is these views, okay? That's all that we have, right? So we aren't getting any of the real benefits that we have of DDL and data integrity and all of that. All we're really getting here is that I've got a pretty front end now to my physical files. So if we have a proper database person comes along, I can turn around and say, oh, look at how pretty this is. It looks like what most people would call a proper database. Though underneath the covers, it is still actually physical files that we have and that in there. But again, the benefit, we haven't touched our DDS, we haven't recreated anything. Okay, so that's the minimal approach. Later on, I will talk about the full-blown feature-rich approach. So without further ado, I shall stop sharing here. And Alan, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Excellent, as always. I noticed you're moving away from calling it refacing. You kind of like did a nice job of like the minimal versus feature-rich. I think that's fantastic how you describe that. Okay, now I'm going to start here. I'm going to share screen. You see this? Okay, great. What's new in open source? Thank you very much. I love all these like hellos from everywhere. It's like, what a wonderful community you've built up here that we really enjoy. Now, okay, so what's new in IBM OSS? That's the hashtag for open source. If you search any of the social media platforms and you look for that IBM OSS, you will find open source information about IBM. So that's a tip to navigate things. We'll cover what's new and some of our favorite open source languages that we use for web and API development. Some new tools, including the long-awaited Visual Studio Code for IBM Debugger. ODBC touches all of this. ODBC is used by all those different languages. So that's some nice enhancements there. How to manage all this new stuff. And your questions as we go along. So feel free to write those questions in the Q&A, and I'll mention the slides, handouts. Everyone who registered will get an email later, probably later today, with a link to the handout, to the slides. So that will be there, okay? You'll all get that. For anyone who's new to open source, we have additional tips and information if you want, because this presentation covers what's new. And we'll try to give some background also if you don't know. But if you're just starting out, you can email me, alan@seidengroup.com, and we'll send you a different presentation on the Impress Your Boss with open source, like how do you use it? What's it for? And there's a link here for how to set up your open source environment on your IBM I, and then a link to our PHP Seiden Group's CP plus PHP as well. Okay. Open source has been very important for IBM's strategy for a long time. And this is a picture from one of our CIO summits where Steve Will was talking to the group about open source and basically saying, look, we love RPG, we love everything that comes with IBM I, but we can't teach the whole world all about that. But what we can do is bring to IBM I some technology that is used very widely around everywhere. So that's PHP, Python, JavaScript or Node and a lot of other open source technologies. We bring that here, and then that opens the doors for new developers and technology people to come onto our platform and then learn the RPG and DB2 and everything else, but they have a kind of comfortable, familiar environment to work in and languages they understand already. So that was pretty smart. That was some time ago. It's really reaching fruition now, getting better and better. My example is some new repositories on IBM I. So those of you who've been involved with open source with AI know that IBM has been delivering these open source packages through RPMs and the yum command, or if you like, through Access Client Solutions. Like you can see, there's a picture here of a lot of different components there. And there's been one IBM repository where they deliver all this. Repository is really just kind of a website that you access in a special way to download the software using the yum command or Access Client Solutions. But as IBM's gotten more sophisticated, they want to do even more. So as a result, they're adding some more repositories. And this is very easy, very easy. Before, there was one repository, which they called IBM. Keep it simple, right? IBM, that's being phased out because IBM would like to add different components for different releases. So like say there's an open source package that only works on IBM i 7.4 or greater or 7.5 or greater. This way they can organize it in different repositories. So instead of that one, now there's going to be two, IBM i base and IBM i release that'll be release specific. And I'll show you how to get those in a minute. You do need to upgrade to these as soon as you can. You can leave your old repository, but you should add these, and I'll show you on the next slide. Because I know some people were saying, how do I get Node 18? I'm on Node 10 or something, and I need Node.js 18. How do I get it? You have to install the new repositories first. Same thing for the ODBC driver updates. Anyway, not a big deal. Here's how you do it. You actually have a choice of commands. Use whichever one you like better. Yum install IBM i repos, or believe it or not, yum update yum. Yum can update itself. How good is that? And if you do yum update yum, that's another way of kind of updating all the different pieces to it. So either one of those will do it, and you'll get the new repositories. And then you run yum repo list. And here's an example of what my server shows. I have IBM, the old one, IBM i base, IBM i release, and then all these Seiden group PHP repositories for different versions of PHP. And you run these commands from either Q shell, UP2 term, SSH, one of those. And the instructions on one of those early slides that I had shows you how to set them up. So if there's any questions, put them on in. But this is kind of a prerequisite now. There's a great command line tool called curl, which some of you know. I loved it from the beginning. When I first worked with it, saying, wow, the IBM I can get out to the internet and pull things down. Very incredible. Jack Wars quoted it. Curl's the most useful single command line tool in web development. I agree, since 1998. We really, our thinking is a bit limited with curl. We think of it as just going out to pull down like websites or APIs or something, but look at how many different protocols there are. FTP, FTPS, POP, and SMTP. There's very many of them. I've been following curl for a long time. I even wrote one of my first articles in 2006 about it, and at a time when it was not easy to install curl on an IBM i or an i5 as it was known then. But my little screenshot from my article shows going to Google and pulling down the homepage of Google that time. But now curl comes with IBM i open source. If you don't have it, yum install curl is the command. But curl is the basis for a lot of the other things we do, so you'll get it automatically, most likely. Some new stuff for letting us integrate curl in our environment, like our RPG and CL, from the light bulb mind of Richard Schoen. Another addition to the QShoni tool is QSH curl, and we have a little article on some of these updates. But it's a shortcut or a wrapper to let you use curl from a command, like a nice easy command where it does the curl command for you, sets up the environment. Like in this example here, QSH curl command line, and then there's a URL going to Google. -O tells you where the output goes, but there's a lot more. You could send the output to a log file that keeps a cumulative log. You can do a log scan to take an action, for example, looking for a certain word that was in the text that's downloaded, to know what your CL program should do next, doing a scan or a search of the text. So it's very convenient to integrate the curl into your environment. But again, it's more than just going to a website. You can use it as a diagnostic tool. We have a catchphrase here at Seiden Group, and I've heard other people say it. It's always DNS. When there's a problem, when something's slow, it may not be your code. It could be DNS, meaning the domain name resolution. Excuse me, that's the wrong. But DNS, oh, server. Yeah, it means like, how do you resolve a domain name to an IP address? And we did this once with a client where something was slow. The PHP got slow. No, well, we ran curl, and it's too. I'm not going to give the whole command here, but I gave the link for it. But when we ran it, it showed that the name lookup was 5 seconds. Everything else was quick. So name lookup 5 seconds. It was a DNS issue. So DNS server name was wrong. That's another advantage of curl, something you can do. If I have trouble with email, like say our application can't send an email properly, instead of going crazy inside the application trying to figure it out, we can use curl to test it. And not only that, we could give the command to, say, a network administrator, say, you test it yourself with this curl command, because you can run it anywhere and try it yourself. It's very easy to do. So first, we make a message we want to send as a test, put it in a file. And then step 2, this is the curl command. You point to the SMTP server. You say who it's from, who it's to, and then the file you want to send. And boom, like that. And you get good information back. I just included the most important stuff here, the kind of the start to it, what server it's contacting and so forth. But at the end, it said client was not authenticated, send anonymous mail. So I sent this to the network administrator and they figured it out what the problem was. So curl is like your ultimate Swiss Army knife, really, to do a lot with one command. So I just get into curl. You can follow it on Twitter or wherever you want. It's excellent and it runs on RI. So it's just so powerful. It's something else, like if a website's slow, I wonder, what if it's the network? What if it's just the network that's slow, getting the website to my PC? What I do is I type a curl command on the IBMI itself, pointing to the web server that's right on the IBMI, so that you're taking the network time out of it. You're doing curl to your own website inside the IBMI. And if it gets a lot faster, then it was your network or somehow the speed getting to your computer or your virus checker. So it's just a wonderful tool you can use to be very creative with it. So enough about curl, but it's great. And now with the Qshoni tool, we can access it even better from our ILE programs. So what's new? PHP, Node.js, and Python. We spend a lot of our time here. Those languages, they're all good. And if you want, you could ask me for a slide deck about my web language shootout, or see me at some of the conferences this spring, because I compare them all in a kind of scientific way, what the differences are and the similarities. We use them all. We support them all. We offer support contracts to help in emergencies, educational, help people with it. Everything like that. They all can do APIs, REST and SOAP APIs, safe, secure access. They can all create web applications. They can all call RPG and COBOL. There are toolkits with every one of them. And they can also be called by RPG and COBOL as well. So they're very, very versatile. There are obviously differences. And again, ask for my slides if you want what I believe are the differences in uses, but they all can kind of do similar things, basically. As I said, they all have IBMI toolkits that let them call RPG and COBOL. It's one of the ways they can do it. There's more than one. They all use XML service underneath, which comes preloaded and shipped. Somebody emailed me today saying, where do I get XML service? It's already on your machine in a library called QXML SCRV. You don't need to use XML to use XML service. It was one of those geek names, but it's just a toolkit. You do it, it's all open source and free. If you want to see some examples of new stuff, we have an example of PDO ODBC connection there at the link for PHP. And there's a Node I toolkit's also improving. And the Python one also works too. I spoke to a client yesterday who took their RPG code and they made it, apparently it was well made already, pretty modular. They turned it into APIs using Python and using the Python I toolkit to call the RPG. So that can work. Yep. So for your PHP to do PHP updates, you know that Zen Server Basic has not been around for a couple of years. That was the free version of Zen Server. So you have a choice of like paying for a Zen Server, or you have other options here. This is a screenshot of the IBM side-by-side comparison page. There's Seiden Community Plus PHP, which is ours, where you can pay for support if you want to, but it's optional. And then Zend has two options as well, Perforce, Zend Server, and Zend PHP. And Seiden Group supports the database adapters. We actually maintain those. So there's something new, and we'll go into that a little bit later too, but there's something cool here in the PHP world. The most popular, it seems to me, at least in this country, North America, is Laravel as a PHP framework. I heard in that Europe, Symfony is popular, but here Laravel is the most popular one. It has an amazing community. Well, there's something new that we helped to bring out. There's a new open source DB2, it's called the driver. It lets you use the Laravel capabilities, database capabilities, but with IBM DB2 specifically. There was an older package that some people use, but it wasn't maintained anymore. So we worked with one of our support clients to come out with a fork that it uses ODBC only, and it's being supported and updated and improved. And it's we have a link at the bottom of the page of an article about it. You see, it's pretty cool. Here's your famous QCUS CDT database. That's our sample database on IBM. And that installs pretty easily, and it's being supported, and we're helping to support that. So that's great for Laravel users. More PHP updates. Just to go back a couple of years, this string contains. People were excited about this because to search for a substring, you used to have the string position command, and it was confusing at times. Now you just get a true or false. Is the substring found or not? That string contains. So it's improving all the time. Much more readable. You know, they say you spend more time reading code than writing it. So this is just so simple, easy to understand. String contains. The latest PHP is 8.2, and we have it here in our Seiden Group Community Plus changelog. It came out in December. A new PHP release comes out once per year, a major new release once a year, and 8.2 is the one now. It's very good. We use it and we install it and recommend it if you can. It has better performance than before. Every new release does. Now it has some new capabilities, read-only classes. This sounds funny to say a feature is deprecations, but actually gets you ready for the next release. Each release PHP gives, and it sometimes takes away functions that it believes are not helpful anymore or that are poor or lead to bugs. It's making PHP every time a much more professional, high-quality language. It's constantly not too fast. They give you time. They say this feature is deprecated. Next time it may not be here anymore, and it gives you a chance to adjust to it. So it's not too fast. Open source moves fast. PHP is just a nice tempo that gives you a chance to adjust over time. And so bug fixes, including some that we're proud of because we help maintain some of these PHP itself and some of the components. And this was a fix to ODBC by our Seiden Group's Calvin Buckley, who's here on the call. We found a bug with one of our clients where if you had a password with a semicolon in it, it caused an error. It was pretty hard to find because you naturally don't put your passwords out in the open. So to find a bug with a password, it's so hard to find sometimes, but we did. And that's the fix here. And the cool thing about open source, it is open. You can go on GitHub or somewhere and actually see what was done to fix it. And but down at the bottom of the screen, it tells you that now the username and password are escaped. So that was one of our contributions. That's very good, 8.2. Another nice thing is the Xdebug component that's shipped with both Seiden's PHP and Zend PHP. It lets you do a lot of things. It lets you do performance profiling, lets you do interactive debugging, line-by-line debugging to understand how a program works and do watches and everything you'd expect with a debugger. And it's free and open source as well. We actually, Seiden Group has a support contract with Xdebug. So we pay them to make sure they're available to us and anything we need and our customers need, our clients need. They're very good and they're making some enhancements, including there's an enhancement for Visual Studio Code, which we love. And that's new. There's an Xdebug extension called PHP Debug that works with Visual Studio Code. That's an improvement that just came out to make it work better. If you use the code for IBM IFS browser, it works really well. And you can learn more about debugging or ask us for assistance on that. So that's really, really kind of exciting. In Node.js, there have been some updates coming along with iToolkit. We've been involved with that, making improvements, little modifications. There's a new XML to JSON converter that creates better JSON in the end, better support for different transports like SSH, so you don't need a database. Corrected the program call. We helped with that. And we have an article actually on getting started with the Node iToolkit for IBM. And again, every language, PHP, Node, and Python all have a toolkit. Python 3.9 is the latest that we have. Python, like these other languages, are interpreted as they run, but they all manage to speed themselves up. And as Python runs, it creates the compiled bytecode. It sticks it in a file called PyCache. That's its way to speed things up. Like PHP has its opcache, Python has PyCache. So one of our clients said, I noticed a new directory, PyCache, which was in the middle of his script. It was in the middle of all his script. And he was confused. What are these files in here? Well, that's where it went by default. But since Python 3.8, you can change the location, because you probably, if you're using like source control, you don't want to check in this cache stuff into your source control. It'll get in the way and mess things up. You really don't want to save that. So you can specify a different location where it goes. So that's something that's kind of recent that came out in Python. Something else good, I mentioned the QShoni tool from Richard Schoen, which is again free and open source. But there's new features, like it's really oriented toward Python, among other things. So used to be called PyRun. There's an enhancement to QSH PyRun, which runs Python in supporting virtual environments, which is our recommended way to run Python as virtual environments rather than globally. So it's adopting Python best practices. There are other enhancements. You can write more to log files for security information, capturing log information. And then, as I mentioned before, QSH curl. But the Python specific one is an update to QSH PyRun to support virtual environments. And we have an article on what's new there. It's really a very interesting tool. It's getting better all the time. And it's open source like everything else we're talking about. You can make enhancements. I made little documentation enhancements, requests, very responsive. So about ODBC. ODBC works with everything else we're talking about today. It is the strategic direction of the IBM team. Rather than IBM creating so many different drivers and connectors all over the place, it was better for them to pick one. And ODBC was already very popular from, let's say, Windows to IBM. So IBM took that same driver and adapted it so it works on IBM as well, directly on IBM. And the driver is covered by the support you have already, the SWAMA support. It runs the same one, IBM, Windows, Linux, Mac. This is very appealing for developers who may want to write their code, develop on their PC, and then deploy it to IBM for production, or to test something on their PC. Run the same thing, the same code on all those different platforms. Write once and run it from everywhere. And all the different major languages already have support for ODBC. And that's the nice thing. So IBM doesn't have to do something special. It's maintained, like PHP has PDO ODBC, Node has Node ODBC, which is kind of an IBM product, and Python has PyODBC. And as we do upgrades with clients, we're moving them toward these ODBC connection packages. We recently helped a company move from Node 6 to Node 18, just step by step, and it went fine. And the next step is to move them off the DBI proprietary adapters into Node ODBC. So that'll be the next step with them. But it's just continuum, step by step, baby steps, and it's working well. So that's what we're doing over time. So what's new with ODBC? To install the driver is now easy. I've gotten so used to this. I forgot, like even a year ago or less, how hard it was. You'd have to go to the IBM site, log in, know what to download, get a zip file, unzip it, install the RPM by hand. And that was for legal reasons, but IBM, I have to give them a lot of thanks. They made this a lot easier now, really easy. It can really save you if you have to do something fast with ODBC just to do this. So now we can use Yum. Yum install IBM iAccess. That's the name of the package for ODBC on the directly on the Yum install IBM iAccess. And remember before I said you need to install the new IBM repositories, and this is an example. You need the IBM I release repository to get these new things, or else you'll kind of be stuck in the past. The slide before mentions how to do it. You can also install through ACS. This screenshot shows that IBM iAccess. We have a blog post with details on how to get this set up. But once you do it, it's so nice. Then you do Yum update to get a new version. Yum update IBM iAccess. You don't have to go download something new. So makes it easier for us all to stay updated and on top of this stuff. And there are a lot of fixes every single time, which happens twice a year. Something else that's new, which is really handy, saves you time again, for people who run ODBC from Linux, connecting from Linux to IBM I. you will want to encrypt your ODBC connection to use SSL or TLS more precisely. There was always a keyword called SSL that you could just turn on in your connection string. That worked from Windows, but it did not work from Linux before. As a result, we had to go through extra steps. We had to set up this S-tunnel, secure tunnel to do a proxy. It was pretty complicated. It worked. But now, as of November 2022, the ODBC driver supports that SSL keyword for Linux, SSL equals 1 in your connection string or your DSN. Now, something that might be confusing when you look at open source updates, you may have seen this improvement announced with the technology refreshes, the TRs. Even though it was kind of announced there, it was actually packaged with the updates to ACS. That's twice a year, I think May and November. Okay, and it works. Good, always good to have security. Something else that's relatively new in our ODBC connection strings. I just mentioned the naming equals 1 to enable library lists, but what's new is trim character fields equals 1 to trim spaces. How many times have I looked at code where the developer took every field and like trim, 100 trims? I hated to see all that wasted work and code in there. Why do we do this sometimes? Because in our traditional, this goes back to Paul's topic about database modernization, our traditional database layouts used fixed length character fields. Now it's getting more common to have variable length varchars, but traditionally it was fixed length, which means that the spaces come along with it. RPG new enough could interpret those spaces and ignore them, but our open source languages aren't used to it. PHP, for example, it just gives you all the spaces. You want me to have spaces, I have spaces. So if you compare a string with and without, they don't match. So I find developers got in the habit of trimming everything. You don't need to anymore with ODBC. Trim char fields equals 1. Everything's automatically trimmed. So I think that's nice. It'll save you time and money on your projects. And we have a link here for more detailed instructions on that. And really all the connection strings. They're really powerful and good. And standardize. So about Visual Studio Code for I, this has really been so wonderful. I found there's some companies where there's a manager and we see, oh, he doesn't even know. I say it's a he because there's one situation I'm thinking of. He didn't know what code he has. Maybe contractors worked on it. He didn't know he could look at it. He wasn't aware. We spent a session with him and installed Visual Studio Code for I and showed him his RPG code so he could at least understand it. It's really wonderful. It's free and open source. You may know that Liam Allen used to have IL Editor. That was a paid product. With his vision that he had, he decided to go open source. He actually threw away an income stream to make an open source product because he believed in it. And it's turned out so beautifully as an add-on to Visual Studio Code, which is seemingly the most popular IDE or editor now. So RDI it still has the most features, but Visual Studio Code for I is kind of the most applicable to the most people because you can edit RPG, COBOL, but also PHP, Python, JavaScript, Node.js, anything. Has database features, and it's community-based. You can see a screenshot here of just how good that is. And you can see on the right side, there's kind of an outline of the different structures and things. It's open source. It's well-managed open source. It's not just one person. You're relying on one person, even though Liam is basically running the project. He has invited people to come in and contribute to it. I'm not an expert on this development, but even I made changes to it. I made improvements. I changed the labeling. I made suggestions. So I have contributions, and you can see they have a page set up for good first issues for people to get involved. And 41 of them were closed already and completed. And that's on GitHub. So if you want to take a look, you can just go in there and take a look at what they have. It's really a wonderful project and a model to what open source is. But what's really new is their remote debugger. This is something that only RDI had. And I have to thank IBM for making this possible. They had to open up their debugging service and have a new one that would work here. Yep, so there's a set of instructions. If you want more details, I actually have slides on that. You can email me and ask for them. But you start the debug service, and then the screenshot here shows some COBOL code that we set a breakpoint on, and we're doing debugging and just stepping through step by step with our breakpoints through the COBOL code and seeing what the variables are and so forth. So it really does work. A more detailed screenshot here. We have your watches and variables and things on the left side, your code there, right? You see where you're stepping through and your procedure. Again, I love a COBOL example. But there's some little tips and tricks to use as you go through and use it. But I think it's just great that we have remote debugging now in VS Code. You can just install it. You do have to set up SSH on your system. That's the one thing. But then you have it. It's all in one place. There's even a terminal. There's a 5250 terminal. There's a paste terminal here. There's a DB2 SQL window. Kind of everything you want in one place. So that's the nice thing about it. And it's very fast. It's very quick. So some more information about code for IBM I. There's a resource guide that we have, a link to a lot of articles, installation steps, and the official documentation site as well. So about open source releases, how to manage them. When you use open source, you're kind of committing to staying up to date. So whereas RPG would improve and change over time, IBM didn't really remove very much quickly, and you didn't feel like you had a security issue if you kept your RPG the same for some time, because everything happened under the covers. The security improvements are kind of underneath for the most part. And so things move more quickly. So you just have to be aware of the cycle. Each language has its own life cycle to know. It's like PHP has a new version once per year, and every month they have small updates as they go along, either bug fixes or security fixes. There's the best site to look at for all these different languages, I find, is called endoflife.date. That's when these different versions kind of end their life cycle, endoflife.date. Even though you can go to individual, like PHP, for example, and see more details, but just to kind of get them all at a glance, like this, I just did a PHP screenshot. You can see how long they're all going to last there. So just here's a summary of the 3 languages I'm focusing on. PHP 8.2 is the newest stable release now. It's very good. 8.1 and 8.0. Also still fine, they're still being maintained. 7.4 and below, end of life. So maybe you have a vendor who may try to backport some fixes and things, but otherwise the PHP community is no longer maintaining those, end of life. So if you want security releases, you got to be on at least 8.0. 8.1 is also excellent. 8.2 is the newest, gives you the longest lifespan. So you think of how far ahead you want to upgrade. If you're on a release that's earlier than 7.4, you may want to try 8.1. Clients we work with, sometimes we start on 7.4, and then if they have like 1,000 applications, it takes them time to test it all. Let me say you might as well go to 8.1, get ahead of the curve. And PHP-V gets you the version. Node.js, which is JavaScript, 18 is the newest. 16 goes end of life September. So really you should try to be on 18 at this point. Anything less is just has a short lifespan or is gone already. 20 is coming out in the community in April. I'm not sure when IBM I is going to get that release, but 20 is coming out soon. That has some interesting features as well, including like an experimental feature where it can detect if you've made changes. So in a development environment, it can detect if you've made changes to your code and restart automatically. It's like what NodeMon does. That's PHP 20 has that. I'm interested in that for development. And then Python 3.9 is the newest. 3.6 already went end of life. Python has a nice long lifespan. You get like 5 years on these things. So anyway, Python -- versions, how you find out the release. So if you're on 3.9 on IBM I, you're in good shape. Okay, so how do you upgrade anyway? So with Yum, it's just pretty easy. Yum update PHP to update. You just add whatever repositories you need. At least that's how our Seiden one works. Seiden PHP. You install the repositories you need for the versions you want, and then Yum update PHP does it. You can also downgrade. Yum is very interesting and powerful. You can update, you can downgrade, you can undo something. It's really pretty powerful and protects you as well. For Python, Yum install Python 3.9, you give the specific version name, and then for Node, Yum install Node.js 18. And the new version will automatically become the default. So running Python or Node will automatically use the new version you put in. You can go backward also, and we can explain how to do that. Okay. And we have detailed tips at the end, by the way, after the goodbyes and everything. We have some more tips if you want them, so they'll be in the slide deck, or if we have extra time at the end to go over them. You should have a plan. Once you're in production, you should have an upgrade plan. And you should also have I would just say, have a development area to test new versions in. Even though these versions are often very safe, you may have dependencies like Node and Python with all their packages. They may rely on certain versions of Node or Python, and that's where you may find a difference when you do an upgrade to test all those NPMs and pips, things like that, because those can move kind of fast. Consider a minor update at least quarterly. That's why with our support, we do a quarterly tune-up where we may do a minor update or at least look at them and see where you are, because that way you stay ahead. You don't fall too far behind. You don't want to wait until you have a giant, big change to make. It's something you have to set time aside to do. With business requirements and business asking you for new things all the time, they don't say, have you updated your PHP? Have you updated your node? They're not going to ask that unless it's a security audit. So it's up to you to have a plan. I think the tune-ups are a good way to do it because you kind of set up an appointment. You make sure you get it done along the way. That's how I find works. So I'll just mention that Seiden Group has what we call smart support with all the open source languages. For example, yesterday we talked to someone who did a great job on Python. They could develop it all by themselves, but it's becoming so mission critical that they like having a company to be there for them and support it. Not only in emergencies, something happens that's bad, we can fix it. Anything weird and unusual, we can answer the question about it because we're in tune with the deep part of the stack, and we also are in touch with IBM and know what's going on. So we can help with the stack. But we don't wait until something goes wrong. Even for our own sake, we like to make sure things are running smoothly all the time. And so we have proactive tune-ups. We look at the logs, we see what's going on the server, and are with you, and we talk to you about everything and make sure things are going well and be ready. And so we also have what's known as Seiden developer support, and that's answering any question developers have with these languages or anything related to them anywhere, or Apache, Nginx. So it's helping keeping your knowledge updated, and it's good for us because we find out what people are thinking and trying to do. But I have this slide here because it's related to keeping your open source environment up to date. It's important for security, bugs, and everything else. Worry-free open source. About ODBC driver updates, I mentioned them before, that they're released twice a year in May and November, along with ACS. To find out what's in those updates before you do the update or after, there's a different page for every operating system that the ODBC driver runs on. So we put together a blog post called What's in Your ODBC Driver. It tells you where to find them. So if you click through on that, you will see, for example, that in November 2022, the TLS or SSL support was added, and it gives some information about it. So you'll find a lot about what's in the ODBC driver, which, as I said, is pretty critical. I created that blog post because I myself didn't know where to look, and I think it was Kevin Adler gave me a hint about where to look. So I thought I'd do a roundup and tell where it was. What's new in web serving? Well, security is always critical, and IBM has made it easier to set up SSL, where TLS is the proper name nowadays, for your Apache web server. Now there's a wizard called Configure TLS, which makes it a bit easier. I wouldn't say it's trivial, but it is getting easier and better. And again, I thank IBM for doing that. That's something else we do. We actually do a lot of is helping set up the certificates for clients and going into the DCM and advising on that. And partly because for reasons of security, the security companies are requiring that certificates get renewed more frequently. It used to be we'd buy a 3-year certificate, but now I see it going like a year or even less. And it may even get to more frequent. There's proposals out there to force people to renew every 90 days. So you have to get more closer to automation to do that. There is an option that you may like. So certain certificate authorities, I think GoDaddy is the one that I've seen, allows you to renew a certificate without having to generate a new one. And if you've done that, then you can click the automatically renewed certificate checkbox and get that done. So that's a nice, cool thing that's pretty new about security and Apache, which we like to see. So here a little bit about Seiden Group, and then we can take some questions, and we can also look at the details about some upgrades. So it's professional open source. For people who are serious about open source or they're learning about it, we do support the Node.js, PHP, Python, and some other things. Of course, we produce PHP ourselves, we deliver it and build it, but we fixed issues in those other languages. Even like Node.js, there was an issue where if the network name was greater than 10 characters, it would crash. And we helped diagnose that and put in a fix to what we call upstream or the community. We talked to IBM about it and helped that get fixed. That's Calvin here on the call and many other things. So provide help with upgrades and kind of everything to help it keep running smoothly. Even if it turns out there's an IBM issue, we can help you write the PMR for IBM, write it in a way that's kind of clear and gets a fix put in. because we kind of know where the boundaries are between the language, the APIs, and everything like that. Developer productivity package is something that we created. I don't know anyone else who offers it. It's a fixed price per quarter, pretty low cost. It means you can ask whatever questions you have. You don't have to go around Googling or DuckDuckGoing or whatever people do now, or calling your AI engine to get an answer to your programming question. Well, what's the best way to do this? What about this query I have? Which language? Wow. A lot of different, great range of questions, and we're not stingy. So you could ask us and we'll put the right expert on the answer. And again, we don't like people to suffer with these searches where you can't find anything. And also do an API startup package, like a proof of concept on APIs, whatever language. So that's it. We do have up to 24/7 support for those mission critical applications as well. And then finally, for PHP, we do an install and learn service. If you can always install our PHP yourself, but if you'd like us to be there with you, we do it and you learn a lot. It's a lot of fun too. And our PHP is verified to work. These various vendors have confirmed that PHP works well, whether it's WebSmart, Curbstone, Harris Data, the PHP Grid. They work with all the different PHPs, but they've confirmed ours is good, and it's one of the ones that they recommend. Okay, and if you're not sure, I do a free migration assessment. Just tell me what your code's like, what you have, and we kind of say, here's what I recommend, here's what version you should go to, just so you can stay up to date on it. It works pretty well. So I wonder if there's any questions. If there aren't, we can show you some details about the upgrades, but I wonder, Kath, Calvin, were there any questions that we should tackle at this point?
We've got one unanswered question at the moment, which is, can IBMI use Let's Encrypt certificates and do the automatic renewal and do the automatic renewal every 90 days?
Yes, IBMI can definitely use Let's Encrypt certificates. So I mentioned automation before. Let's Encrypt is a free certificate provider. The certificates must be renewed. I believe it's 90 days. You can automate it. The thing is, though, you have to stay on top of it. You need to have
the problem. I think the problem is that the tooling to do this nicely doesn't really exist yet.
Yep, we've done it, and Calvin's been the one to come in. And
so it's
things.
Like pretty much all the implementations that we've seen of it are fairly manual. As in, once it's going, it's automatic. The problem is the tooling to interact with, say, traditional things like DCM are not quite there.
Yep. So you've got to set up a kind of server that Let's Encrypt can contact and do things a certain way.
Right.
So
stuff like CertBot can set this up automatically in, say, Linux, but the infrastructure to do that automatically doesn't exist on I yet.
Right. Exactly. So it definitely can be done, but at this point, I still prefer a traditional certificate that you purchase once a year. I prefer that if you're using Apache. I think it's better for most people right now. If you're very into it and you're used to how to do it, you can work on it, or we could help. But I would suggest not doing it quite yet, just for ease of administration. Great question. Excellent question. And watch this. I mean, next year we may be saying something else. We may be saying, yeah, we recommend doing it. Any other questions? Any other unanswered questions?
And one launch an RPG or CL program from Node.js.
How to launch Node or CL from, RPG or CL from Node.js? Is that the question?
Yes.
Oh yeah, what I suggest is, I think I have a link in this presentation to a blog post I did on how to get started with the Node.js iToolkit, which is a way to call RPG and CL programs. And it says how to install it and how to call an ILE program from there. So just take a look. If you can't find it, email me and I'll send you a link to it and we can go from there. But it works. It's always good to reuse some logic that you have. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have years and years of development on this platform, and keeping what's valuable. Jack Warr calls it spinning straw into gold. He's always good with the metaphor. Okay. Any other questions?
Is there an open object distribution capability to distribute and possibly support IBMI products like the real-time program audit for IBMI?
Oh, is this Paul?
Yes.
It's Paul. Yeah, you're talking about actually watching. You could ask me that question offline, I would say. Other questions?
Another question, is it safe to update all packages at any time? It's scary not knowing what's going to happen. When installing PTFs, we would read the cover sheets.
Yeah, well, actually, the packages have information with them. If you go into ACS on the open source, or there's a command, I didn't put it in here, but if you want, I could send you a command to see, there's an equivalent of a cover sheet that tells you what's been changed in it. But the truth is you don't know everything, because there could have been a bug fix. You could, even with PTFs, you can have a bug fix that actually causes a different issue. They may have solved an issue for one person and caused an issue for another person. So you should read what's coming if it's important to you. On the other hand, I think it's smart to have a development area. It could either be you could do it in a CH root very often, or a separate partition really is the best, but you have an option there. Right? So you really need to test. And then it also comes down to the topic of automated testing. So it's not traditional to do it, but over time, the more you could do with automated testing, the better. So I hope that helps. But yeah, I agree. You need to manage it. It's good to get started, and then once you're rolling, at some point, you've got to make it a professional environment, which means ideally having a development environment where you can test, and then even better automated testing. Excellent question. Really good. You're thinking ahead.
As well, Richard asks, can certificates for TLS be generated on IBM?
Can certificates be generated? You do the certificate request. You do a certificate request in IBM and then send that request to the vendor, if that's what you mean. You send that to the vendor, and then they'll provide their certificate and you install it. Typically, that's the typical way that's the way we do it. Calvin can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what we typically do.
Yeah, it's like if you're just generating a certificate for like a self-signed cert, like you can pretty much do everything through DCM.
Oh, he's right. Yeah, you could do a self-signed certificate. It doesn't mean that
if you want some like public authority to do it, then you just generate the CSR.
That's right. You can do a self-signed certificate like for internal use, basically.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit of a non sequitur question, because why shouldn't you be able to?
Yeah, I didn't think you're right. We normally do a publicly assigned one, but yes, you could do a self-signed for internal use. Definitely, you can do that yourself from within the IBM. Good question. Thank you to Calvin for reminding me. Yep. You do both those things. Calvin's going into DCM today, I believe, to help somebody generate a certificate, actually.
I don't like it.
I know, I always apologize, but when you're good, Calvin, what can you say? What other questions? I know we're almost done here, but any other questions for me?
There's one for Paul.
Yeah, sorry, it's okay, Dan. We're just coming on to it now. The feature-rich bit. That's exactly what we're coming on to.
Anything else for me before we transition to you, Paul? We can transition back to you.
So yes, so Alan, thanks for that. I'm glad to see that there's very little happening on open source at the moment. Okay. So, by the way, for anybody, that's called sarcasm. I was being sarcastic. So I have a funny feeling, Alan, that if I gave you another hour and a half, you would still be talking about new features that are going on in there. So thanks a lot for that. If anybody has any more questions for Alan, please just drop them into the
but instead have questions for you.
Perfect timing. All right, so I'm going to hide myself. You'll all get the slide deck in an email that comes to you, and you can ask further questions as we go. So I'm going to hide myself now and take it away, Paul.
Okay, thanks a million, Alan. So let me just get my sharing that going here. And sorry, just before I start sharing, so question here from Dan, question from a coworker regarding the minimal approach from DDS to DDL. How would we add additional fields? If the DDS has changed, we need to if the DDL has changed, we need to rerun the DDL builds. So the thing, there is that on the minimal approach, you haven't touched your DDS. Okay, so if you need to make any changes to your database, you have to do those within the DDS. So if you want to add new columns or something, you're still doing whatever you used to do with your physical files, and then you would have to redo that in your DDL as well if you wanted to use it. So what we're going to talk about now is the second way of doing this, which is the feature-rich approach. And this is where we are going to actually redefine our database as a proper DDL database, but still keep all of our DDS there. so our applications will keep working. And what we are also going to end up with at the end of this is a proper maintainable database. So it is something where I can go to the tables and I can add new columns to those tables and not break anything in my programs. Fingers crossed. Okay, there are a couple of things we have to watch out for. Sorry, Catherine has asked, can't we use an alter table on a DDS file to make changes? No. DDS described you use DDS to change the table. So you can't use an alter table on it. Okay, so with the sort of rich approach on this, what we're going to do is we're going to replace our physical file with an actual table, with a DDL defined table. So this will have a new name on this. Now, what this means is that all of our DDS is going to change in some way. So just think of a simple thing. All of the logicals that exist will now have to point to this new table instead of the original physical file. So every bit of DDS is going to be touched here in some way. So a lot more work involved here, but a lot more benefit to be gained as well. Okay, first thing we need to do then is once we've sort of said, okay, so here is the DDL equivalent of my, my physical file. The original physical file, what was like a PF source, now has to become an LF source that is pointing to that new table that we have just created. Okay, we're going to have to redo any of the triggers that we might have had on that physical file, because those triggers will now need to be on the table, and that may mean that there are changes, there are logic changes that may have to go on in the trigger, depending on other tables or other physical files that may have been touched in the trigger. And then all of our logicals have to be changed to point to the new table that we've defined, as opposed to pointing to the old to the old physical file, which has now become a logical file. Okay, so the important bit with this is that when we recreate all of this DDS, that the record format names are the exact same as they were. That's the big check that we have to do. And if they are, that means we don't have to recompile any of the RPG programs, because they are still seeing exactly what they used to see before. Okay, so can we create logicals on DDLs with select and omit? Yes. Okay, a good question here from, how do you keep your youthful good looks? If I told you that, I would have to kill you all, Steve. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, that may cost you a visit in June, Steve, that one. Okay, so to start off here, I'm going to create a schema, a brand new schema, and I will effectively copy my database across into this when I'm finished. This is just showing you that create from within ACS. And here I'm specifying that all my journaling is to go to a standard journal that I have out there, as opposed to the default journal that would be in the schema. So my first step is to get the DDL to create my tables. So many ways of doing this, but the easiest way I'm just going to do here is from within ACS. So I'm highlighting my 3 physical files there, and I right click on that and I take the option to generate SQL. And here are the options I'm taking, formatting for readability or replace statements, privilege statements for security, etc., etc. And what I end up with is something like this. Okay, now a couple of things that I need to note in here. First thing I always look for is warnings, right? And it's telling me here on these that there was, for example, edit code being used here, and that this is not supported in DDL. So it is telling me things that I'm going to need to check later for this thing of sort of going, well, there's sort of, this is the DDS that is being dropped. Okay. Now, just so you're aware, these are the DDS keywords that are not supported in DDL. Okay, so as you can see, sort of the 2 more common ones are there, edit code and edit word, right? With those, again, depending on what you were doing with display files, you may have had things like range values or check being used in there. Okay, but again, remember they relate to display files. But again, it's just things you need to be aware of, okay, and sort of making note of. In case, because these are things we will have to check for display files and print files later on. Okay, so that DDL that gets generated this is what I need to change for the table. So first thing I need to do is provide proper SQL names. Okay, so these are the long names, no prefixes. Now, the short names are going to remain exactly as they are. I'm not going to change those. Okay, I have to have a different system name for the table though. Okay, so because it's now going to be a DDL table. Remember that physical file that was there will still be there as a logical, so I cannot use that name again. So it has to be a new name for the table. Okay, I watch out for things like the not null default. Be aware of that. I don't want to make sure that I have it there for everything, that I don't want to accidentally start making things null capable. As I said, I'm going to keep the old system names for columns, and I'm going to provide a new format name, record format name as well. Okay, so this is what the changes would look like in my DDL. So the bits that you see in blue and red here. So I've put in the proper long name, customer master here, and here's my new system name. So where it was SA Cusmas, I'm now calling it DSA Cusmas, and I make that same name on the record here. So the big thing I'm putting in here is the proper column names, but all of these short names remain the exact same. Okay, and all the rest of these then are just for the new name. Okay, the new table name going on there. Okay, I would then duplicate any triggers that I had on the old physical file for the new tables. So for external triggers, I would need to just change, if I had things like externally defined data structures, I would need to change that definition in the trigger to make sure it's the new table that it's picking up. Making sure, by the way, that you're using pointers to do that mapping. Please, not substringing. Recompile those, add them to the table. If it's a thing that I had SQL triggers, I would need to, I would do a generate SQL for the trigger, and then in the DDL, make whatever changes are required to make sure that it's pointing to the new table. Okay, and then I would need to review that trigger code, because remember, within the trigger, the logic could be, oh, because there's been a trigger on table A, I'm going to do an update to table B. Yeah, well, table B is now going to have a different name. Yeah, if I'm doing everything in my schema, so I would need to watch out for that. Okay. The next thing then is to redefine the current physical file as a logical file. Okay, so here is what I had. This was the original DDS for the physical file. Okay, and yeah, it now just becomes a logical. Okay, so I change its type to LF, pointing at the new table, and I just have the list of columns. Right, so, and this now gets created as a logical. The big change that comes with this, and this is something that you really, really have to do if you want to have your database, your tables as being maintainable tables in terms of being able to add columns and that. If you have a logical file that looks like this, so you're using the same format name that was on the physical, okay, and you just have something like a key, right? Now, what you effectively were doing here was defining a view with select star. You were saying select all columns, right? You do not want to do this. And actually, if I was being very strict about this, I would say you should never have been doing this with DDS either. Okay, this was a bad thing to do. Okay, so what you need to do is define this and copy and paste all of the column names in. So I'm just going to jump back here. Just grab these and copy and paste them into the logical. Right, now this is very, very important in terms of being able to maintain the table later. And by doing this, you will be able to add columns onto the physical file, or onto the table, excuse me. You'll be able to use an alter table to do that without having to sort of go in and change any of the logical files. Okay, it won't affect them. Okay, so this is just showing you another logical, the exact same. Copy them all in. Okay, change the P file to now be pointing to the new table. Okay, where you had something like this, and somebody had asked this, can you use select omit logic? So here was an old logical that I had with select omit logic. Again, all that's changing in this is the name of the table. Okay, so the physical file changes to the name of the table. Since I was already doing projection in here by listing the columns, I'm still doing the exact same. It's still the exact same columns on the physical file. Okay. So what I'm going to answer very quickly here, Roger's just asking, why is the logical file with all the fields a bad idea? What it means, Roger, is that if you're doing that, if you do like all of them, what it means is that if I recreate the physical file, or what it used to mean was that if you change the physical file and added a new field to it, well, this logical would have to be recreated, and this logical would now have that new field in it, which meant all of the programs that reference that logical now had to be recompiled, or they would get format checks. Okay. By having it where you list the columns, where you're specific on the columns, in other words, where you don't do select star, okay, or the equivalent thereof, the DDS equivalent of that, what that means is that you can now change the underlying table, add new columns to it, okay, and you now only need to change the logicals that need to use those new columns. All of the others can stay as the same, okay? So it makes for a maintainable, easy to maintain database. With it. By the way, this is why you have the golden rule in database that you never touch the table directly. You always go through views. Okay, and that's the why. Okay, and Roger, but is there a performance degradation at runtime? No, there is no, absolutely none. Zero, nada, nilch. Don't know if I'm getting that across. No, there is no performance overhead with this. Okay. Okay, again, just so you're seeing examples here, this is where we would have had a multi-format logical. Okay, this is now a multi-format logical over two tables. Again, all that's changing here is the physical file names to the table names. This is a join logical, okay, with that. And again, the exact same, all that's changing here is the table names, and that's it, okay? So when you've done that and you've recreated all of these logicals, remember we're doing this in a new schema or a new library if you want to think of it that way. So we're duplicating everything over there. And now what we need to do is check the format names and to make sure that everything is the exact same. So here is an SQL statement to do that. So I can do this within Run SQL scripts. And all you're identifying here is what the two libraries are. So the old one and the new one. Okay, and again, if you want to hone it down a little bit on, here I'm only checking, tables, system where the table name begins with SA. Yeah, be as specific as you want. Okay, and you will see something like this. So it shows you the old format level identifier, and here's the new one. Okay, now if you want in the statement here, the little bit I have in gray at the bottom, if you want to add that, it will only show you the rows where there is a difference in the format name, as opposed to seeing that everything is the exact same. Okay. So Ake says here, so expecting wrath, why not level check star no? I'm going to take that as being sarcasm, Ake, as to why you're asking level check no. Level check no, if you put level check no and your database has changed, well, potluck as to what's about to happen to your data, okay, is really what's going to go on in there. Okay, so the benefit that you get now with this is that we can alter the table as required, okay? So this means I can add new columns to the table. Of course, what I have to watch out for is if I drop columns, because then the logicals are no longer valid. But now I can add to the tables and everything keeps working, okay? So if I insert a row, these new columns would just get their default values. Or if I wanted to start playing with something like identity columns or row change timestamps or things like that, I can start adding those on in there. And again, not be concerned that it's going to break my applications, because my applications are still working through those logicals, etc., that they had. Okay. So if I do add those new columns, the idea then is that I only need to change any of the programs or any of the logicals that would need to use those new columns for the business reasons. So I only change what needs to be changed, okay? Or create a new one. Or I can now do it with the view, and I'll do everything through SQL. and using all the cool new database stuff that I can do with views, etc., etc. So the idea of this is that I can still leave everything as it was, but now my base tables are there for me to start building indexes and views and all of the proper database stuff that I might want to do. Okay. Okay. The other thing to remember is, remember those things of the edit codes, the edit words, and all of that, and they may need changes. So if it's a thing that you had a display file or a print file that was referencing the physical file to pick up that edit code and edit word thing, you may have to make that change. Now, you could make the change, by the way, that it picks up the reference from the field reference file that you had. I mean, because that is still there for the DDS definition. Or, as I am doing here, put the edit codes in that in directly in the DDS. Okay, the major gotchas that you have to watch out for is that you, when you switch to a table, you may now actually start getting IO errors in a couple of your RPG programs with the data integrity issue. So if it was a program that was causing you, that was the program that was doing the write to the physical file that later on was creating the decimal data error in this other program over here, well, now the error has switched. Instead of getting the decimal data error over there, you're now going to get an error here when you go to write that record, because it's going to say, no, that's corrupt data. Okay. So, but by the way, I think this would be the better, of the two options, by the way. Okay. Never get corrupt data in there in the first place, right? That's where you should be grabbing it. Also watch out though, because it's sort of new tables, you start thinking along the lines of constraints and everything like that, and all those great things that you can do. Again, this is something you have to be very careful with, because constraint violations are something that your programs more than likely aren't written to handle. Okay, so it can be that even though the logic was okay, just the way your program was doing constraints would be wrong. So for example, where you would sort of go, oh, I'm going to delete the order header and all the details, right? If that's what you were doing, if you now put a constraint in place that was sort of going, oh, you can't delete details, you can't delete the order header if it has details. Well, what your program might be doing is deleting the order header first and then all the detail rows, as opposed to doing them the right way around, okay? So putting the constraint in place would cause problems in your programs. Again, things that you just have to watch out for. And then the last one there, as I said, is the coding alterations you may have to make for those unsupported DDS keywords. Okay, going into display files or print files, to make changes for those. They can be sort of the tedious ones that are in there. Okay, so Glenn, sorry, yes, if I wasn't clear on this, sorry, I didn't mean that you cannot physically do an alter table. You can, but it's going to bite you. Sorry, I should have been clearer. Okay, you should not use alter table to change DDS defined anything. Okay, if something is DDS defined, you make your changes through DDS. And I think, as Jason is pointing out there, it will bite you, because you will do an alter table, then somebody does something in the DDS, recreates, and your table and your column disappears. Okay, because it wasn't reflected in that source. So it's fine, as I say, where I say you can mix DDS and DDL, do not mix the functionality. Okay, as I say, if I'm going to create it's either a table or a physical file. If it's a physical file, you define it with DDS. If it's a table, you define it with DDL. Okay. Okay, so questions here. Okay, Shlomo asks, can a field be added while the table is in use? I think that is now possible, but to be honest with you, off the top of my head, I do not know. Okay. What if you use what new numeric fields get blanks? No, Mike, new numeric fields will get zeros. They will get their default value. Okay, so if you have a logical built over a table, and say that logical has the fields A, B, C, and you've got A, B, C, D, E, F, when you insert a row or you add, D, E, F get their default values. Okay, so that will be 0 for numeric. It'll be blank for character. Okay, so Roger says change PF can do the job replacing the alter table. Yep, that's if you make the change to the DDS. Are the gotchas FYI, will they be compilers on the recompile logical pointing to the new table? No, these are an FYI. They will not be errors. Okay, so if you get an error on the create LF, it means you've done something wrong in the DDS. Remember, on most of the LFs, the only thing that you're changing is the name of the physical file. Okay, that the LF is pointing to. The only ones is where you had the select all, where you have to copy paste in the list of column names. Okay, and they are directly and in the sequence, exactly as you had in that logical for the physical file. Okay, are the ones there. Okay, I think that is it. So yeah, overrun by 10 minutes again. Okay, that's from yesterday's session. Sorry, Jasmine, could I ask you to drop me an email on that, please? Okay. Okay, sorry, by the way, I can answer that very, very question, Jasmine. Sorry, you cannot convert between 65535 and 1208. You cannot convert between 65535 and anything. 65535 means no conversion. Okay, so, yep. Okay, everyone, as I said, overran by 10 minutes. Thank you all for tuning in. Alan, Kat, Calvin, thank you for a great presentation. And
one last question, it seems.
Oh, one more question. Did you hear about XCase tool to assist migration from DDS? If yes, what is your point of view? Yes, it's a great tool. XCase is a marvelous tool. That's all I can tell you. As to it's a tool that you have to buy. It's not one of the open source ones. But yes, it really sort of does all of everything I've been talking about here. It will do that for you. Okay, on the sort of rich side of it. Okay, if anyone has any further questions, by the way, you have our emails. Okay, if anybody's wondering, by the way, Alan's email was right there on the very, very front of my presentation as well. So if you have that, you have all of our emails and everything. So without further ado, as I said, thank you, Alan, thank you, Calvin, thank you, Kat, and thank you all for tuning in. And hopefully catch you all again on another Lunch and Learn soon.